Hi, welcome back to my channel. And today I'm starting a new series which is looking at off the beaten track places in England to visit. I often think that tourists come to England and they go to the same old places. They go to London, they go to Madame Tussauds, they do a day trip to Stonehenge where they absolutely fleece you. They're so expensive, those trips. And they go up to Edinburgh and they do the sort of bog standard trips. And I want to show you in this video some other places where you can discover another side of England, which is less touristy, less spoilt. And also, if you're from that area and you've never seen these places, you might like to go and visit them. And two good Bibles to take with you if you're travelling around England are England's Thousand Best Churches by Simon Jenkins, and the same author, England's Thousand Best Houses. This one looks at all the stately homes that you can go and visit in England, and it's a very thorough guide to all the history and all the things you need to look out for. I actually think the Churches book is better. I think Simon Jenkins' heart is more in it. He's more invested in, more interested in his subject. And this is a really beautiful little book. I think every English household should have it. It's a guide to what he thinks are the best country churches still standing in England. And it's a very thorough discussion of their history, all the things that are outstanding in them that are of interest, like tombs and monuments and decorations and changes in architecture. It sometimes can be a bit sharp when he wants to be about the way local towns and villages have been developed. But in general, it's a very good guide. And churches are really interesting places to explore in England because they're good sites of social history. They tell you so much about the history of England that's not in the official history books. Now, to give you an example of what I mean, if you go to Shropshire in the West Country on the borders with Wales, look out if you can find them. They're very hard to find. You'll have to get your map out, your ordnance map out. Try and look for Langley Chapel and Heath Chapel. Now, these are two of the oldest surviving consecrated churches or chapels in England. They go right back to 900s, I think. And what's fascinating about them is they're not particularly impressive buildings. They're very simple buildings. And they're right out in the middle of nowhere. And when you visit them, you get this real impression of what it was, the regular church going of the old days. You can almost see the peasants and the country workers going across the fields to this simple place of worship, sitting in the pews. And the first one, Langley, it's literally sitting in a ploughed field. And you sort of park your car, you come in a little gate, and it's just sitting there, nothing around it at all. Absolutely nothing. You go in, it's a simple one-room space, whitewashed walls, pews, nothing else. And it's just such a powerful sense of how it was, you know, such a powerful sense of simple, rural, rustic life. Heath Chapel is even better in a way. It's in a village, it's in a sort of tiny little group of houses, and it's a sort of T-junction. And there's a field off the T-junction, and it's just sitting in this field. And when I went in the summertime, there was lots of sheep around nibbling at the grass. And there was a great big iron key which was hanging on a little cord behind the board telling you what the name of the chapel. So you got the key and you put it in the big iron door, opened it up, and again, just a simple whitewashed room. There was some flowers that had been left by the local people. It was so beautiful, so moving. And if you've got the time and the energy, seek them out. They're very hard to find. They're sort of nestled in all this little borough, this warren of roads in this area in Shropshire, but they're worth finding out. And just down the road from there is Stokesay Castle, which is a real survivor. It's a 13th century fortified mansion. So it's like one of these kind of old-fashioned mansions from the medieval times that survived. And it's almost like a castle. It's almost like a moat area around it with big walls, and then you see the gables and the building on the top. And the gatehouse into it is Jacobean. It's very beautiful. You get a great sense of old England in that place, and it's highly recommended. Now, another church that Simon Jenkins mentions in his book, I want to mention Dale Abbey. I want to mention Dale Abbey because it's just down the road from where I live, where my family lives in Derbyshire. And Dale Abbey is another intriguing survival from the old times. What it is, it's this ancient church, like a medieval church, but they've constructed a modern house on the back of it. So it's almost like this modern house is heaving this old church on its shoulders and sort of keeping it standing up. So it's a very odd sight. It's this tiny little hamlet. It's got a pub at the top. You go down the hill between a line of houses. It snakes round. Then you find yourself at the path leading up to the church. So you're going up a little hill. And you've got this very ancient church and this very modern house, sort of in this kind of weird kind of meld, this kind of fusion. And you go into the church and it's very cramped. And you've got a tiny little gallery looking down over the altar. It's very beautiful and very moving. Again, you get this incredible sense of local rural history. I don't know if it's still the same. When I first went to Dale Abbey, to get into the church, you had to go back into the line of houses. About the second house along, you knocked on the door and asked for the key. You got this big key, and you put it in the door, and that allowed you in. And the first house you get to from the church is actually, it's got a piece of the Abbey. The village is named after Dale Abbey, and it's got a piece of the Abbey in its back garden. And you can actually ask to go into this bloke's back garden, and he's got an arch of an abbey in his back garden, and he's put up a little information board about it, which I think is so cute. That's in sort of southeast Derbyshire. If you go north, you've got Chatsworth, which is one of the great stately homes in England. Well, probably the greatest, let's be honest. You've got Haddon Hall. You've also got Hardwick Hall, which is really beautiful, where Bess of Hardwick lived. I think that's one of the most beautiful and atmospheric of all stately homes. You can really imagine that it's haunted. It's well worth seeing. If you go a bit west of Dale Abbey, you've got Kedleston Hall, which is also very beautiful and well worth visiting. And if you go south, you've got the sort of market town of Melbourne, which is very lovely. It's also got a very lovely church, which has a leper's squint. A leper's squint was a hole cut into the side wall so that lepers who were kept to the side of the church could look through and see the altar and see the cross. Leper's squint. Yes, there you go. Now, if you go over to the east, you come to Nottinghamshire, which is where I grew up. You've got another market town of Southwell. That's what locals call it, Southwell. But it's also known as Southwell. And Southwell has its own cathedral. It has its own minster, which is a beautiful Norman minster. I think it's Norman. And it used to have beautiful carvings, but unfortunately the iconoclasts smashed them all down. But it's still well worth a visit, and it's really unusual because it's this quite small town, and it's got this great big cathedral in it. And opposite the cathedral is the Saracen's Head, which is where King Charles I spent his last night before getting his head chopped off. If you go down towards Nottingham, you will come across Newstead Abbey in a little village called Ravenshead. Newstead Abbey was the home of Lord Byron. Very beautiful, in large grounds. It's also got its own little cricket pitch. My dad used to play cricket there. And again, it's got got a mix of the old sort of medieval abbey, which still stands, the walls still stand, mixed with a sort of stately home of the sort of early 1800s. It's very beautiful. Gorgeous pond, well worth a visit. If you get to Nottingham, Nottingham Castle is not worth a visit. Don't let anyone tell you it is, because basically all they've got is the gate and that's it. And the inside is all from about the 1800s, I think. But what you want to do, you want to go down the side, down the hill. There's a statue of Robin Hood. And down the hill is the Trip to Jerusalem, which claims to be the oldest pub in England. There are actually lots of pubs who claim that, but I believe the Trip to Jerusalem because I grew up in Nottingham. And it's actually built into the castle walls. So Nottingham Castle was actually built on this kind of rocky outcrop. And the Trip to Jerusalem is built into the walls. So you're actually sitting in a sort of cave. It's very atmospheric. It's a great place to have a pint. Back in Derbyshire, I just wanted to mention one of my favourite places to go when I was a kid was the Blue John Mines. This is a big cave system where you get this special gem, the Blue John, that you can buy from there. And down the road from there, near Castleton, is the Speedwell Cavern, and they do little boat trips on this underground river. Sometimes it floods and you can't go there, but when it's okay, when it's available, you go on this little boat trip. I remember doing that as a kid, and the guides sort of calling out and making echoes with their voices and all that sort of stuff in the dark. I loved it. I think it's still going. I've just checked it on there and it's still going. So Speedwell Cavern is worth investigating. There's also Cresswell Crags, which is probably of interest only to people who are interested in anthropology and prehistory. But they found out all sorts of, evidence of Paleolithic man at Cresswell Crags. So that's kind of interesting. Finally, in this little video, I'd like to give a little plug for a local church near where my mum lives. It's a village called Weston-on-Trent, just south of Derby, about 3 or 4 miles from Derby. Now, this is a beautiful church, and if you approach it across the cornfield behind, there's a little track, and it's one of the most picturesque views you will see in England. It's not a known church. Simon Jenkins doesn't mention it in his book, but I love it, and recently they let out an appeal. The congregation had fallen to 4 people, and that the church was in danger of being discontinued. And the local people have rallied, and they've set up all sorts of schemes to try and raise money for the church and raise the congregation. They've done fantastic work. They really have. Really impressive. They've set up a lottery. They've taken a copse of trees nearby and they've turned it into a place to sit and look over the valley. And I'd really like it if some of you watching would give them some support. The church is not always open, but they do have a site on Facebook that you can join, Friends of Weston Church. Please do join them and give them a bit of support. It's a beautiful church. I'll leave some photographs for you on this video. Just a little plug there, because I'm so fond of what they're doing and I really admire them for doing it. So that's my first set of places that you can visit in England that you may not have heard of. Next time I'll be talking about stone circles and historic sites. Thanks very much.